these men, these Jewish men who were not believers, said that Isaac was sitting arm in arm with a rabbi, and that at one point the rabbi was weaker than Isaac and he was leaning on him, and then at one point Isaac got weaker and weaker and weaker and was laying sort of in the arm of the rabbi. And of course, both Isaac and the rabbi, they were religious Jews. Isaac was before he became a believer, of course, and they knew a lot of the Psalms by heart. And so Isaac was reciting Psalms. I'm sure he was reciting Psalm 23 because that is a funeral psalm, and I think Isaac knew he was about to die. Shalom again. This is Mitch Glazer, president of Chosen People Ministries, and what a privilege it is to talk to you about something that's so personally meaningful to me. You know, one of my favorite chapters in the New Testament is Hebrews 11. And in Hebrews 11, we have great vignettes, stories about great heroes. And they were heroes, actually not New Testament heroes. They were all Old Testament heroes. They were all Jewish heroes who suffered because of their faith and who fought against despondency and latched on and struggled to find hope. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so many others in the Old Testament. And you even have one incident where we really think it was Isaiah who was listed as one of those great prophets who was sawn in half and by his enemies. And so the book of Hebrews is wonderful. But then when you get over into chapter 12, therefore, we have a cloud of witnesses. And that cloud of witnesses are these Old Testament saints and heroes who, no matter what the circumstances, suffered, hoped, sometimes struggled with hoping and faith, but they came through for God. And they're great examples to us. And those examples didn't stop with Hebrews 11. That great cloud of witnesses, I believe, is the crowd who are cheering for us in heaven. They went before us. And we've been adding to their group, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. And some of the heroes that I know you're going to meet and really appreciate will be Jewish believers who suffered during the Holocaust because of their faith. So let me tell you about Isaac Feinstein. Isaac Feinstein was a Romanian Jew, and he lived in a town called Iași. And Iași was part of Bessarabia, which was the capital of Jewish Romania. Eventually, Bessarabia would become part of the former Soviet Union and parts of Ukraine, actually. And so Isaac Feinstein was a businessman. He, early in life, came to faith in Jesus the Messiah, actually in his mid-30s. And he was a faithful man of God. He was a gifted singer, writer, author, preacher. He had the great privilege of leading somebody to the Lord you might know about, because you might not know Isaac, but you probably know Richard Wurmbrand. So Richard Wurmbrand came to faith through Isaac Feinstein. And Richard had been a good Jewish boy living in Bucharest, and he met Isaac, and Isaac shared the gospel with him, and he came to faith. Before Wurmbrand came to faith, he was the head of the communist youth in Romania right after the communist takeover, right after World War II. And so Wurmbrand was a great hero of the faith as well. But he suffered in communist prison camps for years, and then eventually came to the United States, wrote the book Tortured for Christ, and Christ on the Jewish Road, two great books that you'll want to read if you can get them. And so Isaac Feinstein led Richard Wurmbrand to the Lord, and both Isaac Feinstein in Iași and Richard Wurmbrand in Bucharest started Messianic churches, Messianic congregations, where they sang in Hebrew and worshiped the Lord with a nice Jewish accent. And the food was probably kosher in their time of fellowship. But Feinstein was really brave, but he was also very smart. And he knew something was coming. Dark clouds loomed over Romania in the mid-30s. There was a group called the Iron Guard. And the Iron Guard were Nazi-like, but not Nazis. But they would identify eventually with the Nazi brown shirts. This is way before communism. Jewish people in Romania suffered great persecution. Their job options were limited. Their education was limited. The reason so many were in Bessarabia and in Iași and in Bucharest was those were places where Jews could live. They couldn't own property. They couldn't own businesses. And so there were a lot of restrictions on the Jewish people. A lot of people, including our own Joseph Hoffman Cohen, who was the son of our founder, went to Iași to meet with Feinstein in 1937, maybe early 38. And he tried to persuade Feinstein to come to America because Joseph Hoffman Cohen knew that things were going bad. And so did Feinstein. And Feinstein said, I can't. A shepherd needs to stay with his sheep. And so Feinstein stayed. One day, the Nazis were now invading Romania, not militarily, but they were working with the Iron Guard. And so the SS and the Iron Guard were kind of in cahoots. And already there were some very early concentration camps. And one day they burst into Feinstein's home, and he was married with 7 or 8 children at the time. And they burst into his home and they arrested Feinstein. They brought him to the police station. And then from the police station, they brought him to another, basically a torture chamber, and they beat him half to death. And eventually, Feinstein was put on a cattle car, a train, to go to a very early concentration camp. And let me tell you, most of the people who got on that train didn't make it to the concentration camp. And so some people say that the Nazis didn't need any help in Romania because the Iron Guard had already done their job for them. Feinstein was one of those people. A few days and months into Isaac's absence, his wife received a note from some of the Jewish people who were on that train who were not believers, who actually had been with Isaac at the police station and knew of him and liked him. They knew of him at the police station, and they were on the same cattle car train with him. And they eventually said, can we visit you? And so this was dicey because the Nazis were now in town. It was hard to get around for Jewish people. So they came to visit Isaac's wife, who was not Jewish, she was Norwegian. She was actually a missionary to the Jews who was ministering in Romania, and that's how she met Isaac. And then they were married and had a bunch of children. And so she was a very strong believer. And so these Jewish non-believers wrote to her. She said, of course, come over, and I'd love to hear the story of my husband's last days. And they told her about what he did in the police station. It seems he jumped up on a table in the midst of all this, which is why they took him away to torture him. He jumped up on the table and began preaching the gospel. And let me tell you, some of the Nazis were really into pagan mythology and the dark arts, and what they preached, they hated. But also, the Romanians were probably Orthodox Christians and were very anti-Semitic and didn't like a Jew talking about Jesus. So they pummeled him and they tortured him and they put him on the train. And these guys, these people telling his wife the story, got on the same train. And as they were traveling, Isaac was getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And there's a very poignant and beautiful little story about what happened. And it was written up in the Chosen People newsletter in 1938. It's just a beautiful story. But these men, these Jewish men who were not believers, said that Isaac was sitting arm in arm with a rabbi. And that at one point, the rabbi was weaker than Isaac, and he was leaning on him. And then at one point, Isaac got weaker and weaker and weaker and was laying sort of in the arm of the rabbi. And of course, both Isaac and the rabbi, they were religious Jews. Isaac was before he became a believer, of course, and they knew a lot of the Psalms by heart. And so Isaac was reciting Psalms I'm sure he was reciting Psalm 23 because that is a funeral psalm, and I think Isaac knew he was about to die. There he was in the arms of the rabbi, talking to him about Jesus, reciting the Psalms with the rabbi, and it was one of those moments when Isaac passed into the presence of the Lord. And then these guys actually jumped out of the train, and a few of them were killed in the process, but if 2 or 3 of them made it, and that's how they came back to Isaac's wife to share this wonderful story about the faithfulness of a Jewish man who believed in Jesus, transformed his life. He was able to proclaim the gospel and be a shepherd to sheep who were suffering incredibly in Romania in that time. And then he also had the opportunity to share the gospel with a rabbi, laying in his arms, talking to him about the Lord, slowly passing into the presence of his Savior and Messiah. What a great example. Don't you want to meet Isaac when you get there? I mean, from my perspective, he's going to be one of the great saints in that cloud of witnesses that today is cheering us on to remain faithful to the Lord no matter what the circumstances, no matter where we are, whether it's uncomfortable, whether we're suffering, no matter what the situation is. We have great examples to look to in Hebrews 11 and throughout church history of how to serve the Lord during difficult days. And so may this be a tremendous inspiration to you. Shalom for now.